welcome to another Capital Ideas. I'm Sandy Behan, and our guest this week is Senator Brad Henry. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's very good to be here again.
Yes, you represent Senate District 17, and you are an incumbent and up for re-election this year. And you just finished your first term, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about Senate District 17 because it is a very diverse district. You live in Shawnee. And
Right.
yet, we were talking earlier, 1/3 of your district is basically East Norman, and more specifically the Hall Park area that would be watching this show. So how do you juggle all those constituencies?
Well, it's a little difficult. Actually, 1/3 of the district is in Cleveland County, which is the northeastern portion of Cleveland County, and I suppose the largest population in Cleveland County is in East Norman. I have a little bit of East Moore also. It's a little difficult to juggle the different constituencies. It's not real hard for me. I lived in Norman for 9 years of my adult life, through college and law school, and then after law school I worked in downtown Oklahoma City at one of those tall tower law firms and bought my first home in Norman. So I'm very familiar with Norman and Cleveland County. I've got a lot of friends over here, which helps. The constituencies are a little different. I also represent the southeastern quadrant of Oklahoma County, the Harris-Newalla area over to Choctaw on the west and Luther Jones on the north. That group over there is a little more rural oriented, and the difficult thing about the Cleveland County and Norman areas of the district is that the areas that I represent don't have a real sense of community. So there aren't a lot of functions in my portion of the district. I come to Norman all the time for various functions and official gatherings, but they're usually in the central part of Norman, and typically there aren't a lot of my constituents that attend those kinds of things. My constituents have a lot of road problems and concerns about taxes and things of that nature. They do seem to be very concerned and supportive of education, which I am very pleased about, since that's one of my primary concerns also. So it's difficult to juggle. They've got some different concerns in Oklahoma County and in the Pottawatomie County area where I'm from and was born and raised, a few different concerns there also. I think Shawnee is probably one of the most politically controversial towns in this state. There's always something going on, and it makes the job interesting. Let me just put it that way.
What would be an issue where there would be a real oppositional kinds of attitudes, for example, between your constituents in Norman and Cleveland County and, let's say, the people in Pottawatomie County?
Well, in the 4 years that I've been in the legislature, there really hasn't been an issue that pitted Pottawatomie County constituents against Cleveland County or Oklahoma County or vice versa. I suppose the thing that I really like the Cleveland County area because the constituents here seem to be more pro-education. The Pottawatomie County and the Oklahoma County areas of my district, for instance, voted for the repeal of 1017, House Bill 1017, the Education Reform Bill in 1991. The Cleveland County constituents voted against the repeal. I also was against the repeal of 1017, and I think the statistics, the results, prove that that was a very positive measure for education, and every expert will tell you that economic development and jobs, as well as lower crime rates and lower welfare rolls, are tied to quality education. So that is one issue. That was before I was in the legislature. But I do see that the Cleveland County area constituents appear to be a little more pro-education, which pleases me, and I have to deal with that some. But there hasn't been a real contentious issue where I've had to stand against one constituency versus the other, thank goodness. And I don't think there will be. They're not that diverse. They have some localized, specialized concerns, but
for example, on the 1017 issue, was it the issue of money that you think the Pottawatomie people objected to?
Yeah, and I certainly don't mean to indicate that the Pottawatomie County or Oklahoma County constituents are anti-education. I think the tax issue on 1017 was probably the major factor. They appear to be a little less, or a little more reluctant, I guess, and I hesitate to use this term, but the term that I hear a lot is just throwing money at education. And I don't think anybody's for just throwing money at any program. We try to target the funds for, towards areas and programs that are proven, that work, and either have a track record in Oklahoma or in other states. And that's kind of the thing that I heard back during the 1017 measure.
Okay. As you go back and you talk to your constituents now in an effort to be reelected, what do you point to in the legislature that are things that you've accomplished that you feel good about?
Oh, boy, there have been so many. I can certainly say that I have been very active in the legislature. I have worked hard. I have put in the hours. I've gone to all the meetings. I engage in all the debate and try to ask the right questions. I read every bill. I have a reputation for reading every bill. I have, in the 95 session, for instance, I was the author of the tort reform measure, which was billed as the largest, most significant tort reform package in Oklahoma history to try to prevent lawsuit abuse. This past year, I authored the $5,500 income tax exemption for senior citizens, for private sector retirees, in order to equalize them, give them the same income tax exemption that the public sector retirees have. One bill that I'm very proud of is a bill that I authored this year, which grants a $10,000 income tax deduction for adoption-related expenses. Anything from attorney's fees to medical expenses to home study costs. Virtually every adoption-related expense is now a deduction under Oklahoma law up to $10,000, which helps encourage families to adopt. And by the way, at the federal level, Congress recently passed a $5,000 income tax deduction for adoption-related expenses. So it's a big deal now. You get up to $10,000 on your state taxes and up to $5,000 on your federal taxes. That's just a sampling. I'm on the Appropriations Subcommittee for Education, as well as the Education Standing Committee. But on the Appropriations Subcommittee on Education, we wrote the education budget this year that provided the largest increase for higher education in state history. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of $70 million. I had a very integral part in that, and I'm very proud of that. So.
Okay. We talked a little bit earlier, too, about another bill that you were involved with, which deals with driver's licenses for teenagers. And want to explain a little bit what that was all about?
A very interesting concept. I had a young mother approach me early last year, or I guess late last year, early this year, before the 96 legislative session. She's a single mother who works, and she has a son that is 16 years old. And he has been in and out of trouble with the law. She was very concerned that she didn't have the ability to prevent him from receiving a driver's license. As a parent, she wanted to have that authority. She was afraid that if he got a driver's license that he would end up in jail or kill himself or kill somebody else possibly. So she talked to me about it, and the more I thought about it, I really didn't see any drawbacks. So in short, we passed a law this year that I wrote and authored, that gives parents for the first time in history the ability to either, one, prevent their minor children, ages 16 up to 18, from receiving a driver's license, or after they get one, the parent has the ability to revoke that driver's license. So it gives parents some control over an area that is very near and dear to the 16 and 17-year-old's heart. It's made a difference. I've had a number of parents contact me, and the students that I've talked to, by and large, have been supportive of the concept also. Probably 85–90% of the students, because I interviewed a lot of high school students, they have been for it too.
Did you interview them before you authored the bill or after?
Well, I interviewed them before the bill passed, after I had filed the bill, and I took it to various student groups and talked to them about it and got their opinion, got some feedback, and quite frankly, after we got the feedback from the students, we made some changes in the bill that I think made it better.
Do you normally do that sort of thing? I mean, once you author a bill, then go and talk to different groups that would be affected by it to see what the input they might have?
Yeah, I try to. It's just not feasible. We don't have enough time to talk with every group that is affected by legislation that we file. I try to do that. I try to get out into the community as often as I possibly can and discuss legislation, not only that I've offered, but that other senators or representatives have authored that affects the constituencies, and get feedback from them.
Did you seek out the students, or did they seek you out?
Actually, I sought out the students. You know, most high school students, because of their situations, they're going to school, they have football games and sports and other things that they do, and I mean, it hadn't been all that long ago since I was in high school. Quite frankly, when I was in high school, I wasn't that interested in what was going on at the Capitol. So they weren't going to know about it, most likely, until after the law was passed, had I not sought them out. And I did, yes, I sought them out and met with several different groups and got real positive feedback. I was pleased.
In that experience, okay, in addition to just some real specific information about a bill that you are authoring, what did you learn from talking to these kids?
Well, I learned, number one, that they are more interested in what goes on at the state capitol and the governmental process than I thought they were. My wife teaches honors government and American history at Shawnee High School, and so I have a chance to talk to her classes quite a bit. But those are the honors students, and they tend to be a little more interested. I talked to several groups of some honors students, some not. I was real pleased with the fact that they tend to really care about what we're doing at the state capitol. They just don't have the avenues and the opportunities to really go up and get involved. But I certainly encourage people of all ages to contact legislators, read the newspapers, try to follow the legislative process as closely as you can, and contact us when there are questions or concerns.
Who calls you the most often? Or is there any?
Probably the people that don't support me call me the most often. Some in the other party, or who are just mad and upset with me for whatever reason. They like to call me and bug me, and that's fine. I have people who worked hard against me 4 years ago that I've done more for them than a lot of people. If you call me and ask for help, I try to help. I don't know what group calls most often.
I guess I should rephrase that a little bit. Generally, the people who call, are they upset about taxes, or are they specific issue kinds of things, or? Most
of the calls that we receive, and we receive probably anywhere, depending on the day, from 25 to 50 calls at either one of my offices, and it increases when we're in session because the public awareness and the media coverage increases. Most of the calls that I receive are, when we're not in session, are related to specific problems, either difficulties with an agency in terms of getting a permit somewhere, or a Social Security check, or something of that nature, problems with
fairly personal.
The tax commission has assessed a penalty or a late fee or something. Yeah, personalized calls. During session, probably, I mean, we still get about the same amount of problem-related calls, but we get a lot of calls related to legislation too. And, various groups get their memberships stoked up about some bill, and we'll get 40 or 50 calls a day on one particular piece of legislation, maybe. So.
Okay, very good. We'll be back in just a moment with two students from Central Mid High School. Our student guests this week are John Droscher and Stacy Carmen. And Stacy, I believe you get to ask Senator Henry his first question.
What are the primary issues in this campaign for you?
Oh, they vary. I think the primary issues for me are the fact that as a one-term senator, I have been very effective I've done a lot of things, you know, from reduced taxes to strengthen criminal laws, to giving parents more authority over their children, on and on and on. And you know, my issues are my track record and the fact that I'm fair, I work hard, and I listen to everybody. And I think those are the primary issues for me.
What is the AFL-CIO expecting in return for their campaign contribution?
I don't have any idea what they are expecting. They're not, you know, they're not going to get anything but good government. I'm glad you asked that question because that has been an issue that my opponent has raised. It's completely unfounded. In fact, the AFL, I take money. I don't discriminate with regard to campaign contributions. I take money from any individual or any group who's interested in good government. But make no mistake, there are no strings attached to any contribution. And in fact, the AFL-CIO contribution came in just before the legislative session started this past year, and their number one issue was a municipal bill that imposed that made binding interest arbitration when it comes to police and firefighters at the city level constitutional. That was their prime issue this year, and I voted against it for a number of reasons. So it didn't have an impact on me. It didn't have an effect. And quite frankly, after a campaign's over, I really forget who gave me contributions, and it doesn't really. It has less of an impact than what my opponent would make of it. But by his same reasoning, you know, I've received contributions from Chamber of Commerce groups and business groups and bankers and other groups. So for him to allege that I'm somehow bought and paid for by one group that gives me a contribution, it doesn't make sense. I can't be bought and paid for by all these competing groups.
What were your most rewarding and your least rewarding experiences this session?
Oh boy, that's a good question and kind of a tough question. There are a lot of rewarding experiences and frustrating experiences in the legislature. I would have to say probably my most rewarding experience was taking tough legislation such as tort reform and debating it for 2 hours on the Senate floor and butting heads with the Dean of the Senate, Gene Stipe, who was adamantly opposed to it, and taking him on straight ahead, the veteran senator, and whipping him on that issue. I mean, I have had a record of taking on tough issues, not being afraid to take a stand, and taking on those veteran legislators and winning those issues. And that's fun. I like a good, heated debate. Sometimes I refer to it as a battle on the Senate floor. That's what I like to do. I like to argue with people, and we always do it fairly agreeably. But that's fun, and those have probably been the most rewarding experiences. I think probably the least rewarding experiences have related to some of the partisanship and partisan politics that has gone on between the legislature and the governor's office. I think, at least in my opinion, our governor tends to want to make everything a political issue rather than just saying, let's forget about parties here. Let's look at an issue. We typically want the same, we have the same goals. We just have different ideas as to how we get there. Rather than saying, let's roll up our sleeves, forget party labels, and try to work together for this particular goal. He tends to want to make it a partisan issue, and he gets to hold press conferences every week, and he has all the media there, and he calls us names, and it just doesn't facilitate good government, in my opinion. So that's probably my least rewarding experience about this session or the past session.
How do you feel about the Secretary of State being out of office most of the time while he's still being paid as if he was there?
Well, I think that question could apply to both the Secretary of State and the Governor. They are both gone an awful lot, and I don't know. I have to be careful here because I have a lot of respect for both of them. They're highly intelligent men. They do a good job by and large, but they are gone a lot, and I don't know the specifics of where they go and why they go there. I know they're engaged in a lot of partisan campaigning. And I wish, it's my feeling that they should be a little bit more full-time in terms of their leadership, either in the Secretary of State's office or the governor's office. So that's just my opinion. I think they ought to spend a little more time in the office and concentrate on the duties that we as taxpayers pay them to do.
I was a little bit surprised. Now, I know as a legislator that in theory at least, well, I know you maintain a law practice in addition
Right.
to, and other people also maintain their businesses or whatever other jobs they have. But as an employee of the state, as a sort of a secretary of the state, that implies to me that that's a full-time job, and yet that particular individual maintains another full-time consulting business, and I didn't realize that that was legal.
Well, and I haven't researched the issue, but apparently it is legal. The governor's response, I believe he was asked just recently about Secretary of State Tom Cole's absence or not spending enough time in the office, as well as his own. And his response was, well, look at the legislature. They have businesses, they practice law, they sell insurance, they're school teachers or whatever. That's an improper analogy. I mean, our legislature is not meant to be a full-time legislature. We meet 4 months out of the year. Yes, it really is a full-time job in that we have to work on constituent problems year-round, but it's not meant to be. We're not paid to be at the Capitol and be in our offices full-time, like the governor and the Secretary of State are. So, yeah, it's a question. It's raised a lot of questions, I guess. I don't know. I just don't know if it's a real big issue. I'm not even sure what Tom Cole's salary is, and when he's there, he seems to do a pretty good job. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, Stacy.
What changes are you trying to make in the criminal code?
Well, we have been working on the criminal code now for a number of years, and I'm on the criminal code revision committee. What we're trying to do, and we've run into problems in the legislature, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to revise the criminal code, bring it up to date. I mean, it is still, we still have crimes. It's illegal if you're blind to have a cane without a red tip on it. Now, that's ridiculous. That's a misdemeanor, and it shouldn't be. We've got a lot of misdemeanors that shouldn't be misdemeanors on the books. But the primary thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to make the criminal code, we're trying to revise it so that it will fit into a truth in sentencing structure or a truth in sentencing law, which essentially says that you have certain guidelines, sentencing guidelines, and we can't implement the guidelines until we revise the criminal code to make the criminal code fit into those guidelines. But if you commit a felony, let's say burglary in the second degree, you're going to look at these guidelines and it's going to give a range of prison time. And what truth in sentencing would do is it would say that whatever you're sentenced to within that range, you're going to spend a certain percentage, definitely, of that time in prison, whether it's 85%. I personally believe it ought to be 100%. I think that what we ought to do is we ought to have this minimum and maximum range, and you ought to spend 100% of the minimum range. Now, the incentive to behave in prison will be that if you don't, your sentence could be increased up to the maximum within that range. So if you behave, if you do what you're supposed to do, if you get a GED or VOTEC skills, if you go through the drug and alcohol treatment programs, if that's part of your problem, then you're going to get out at the end of 100% of that minimum sentence. So,
Do you feel that the governor's use of a plane that's paid for by the state for private use is morally and lawfully right?
The governor needs an airplane. There's no question about that. As the chief executive of the state of Oklahoma, he has I mean, there is some necessary travel for him to appropriately represent the state of Oklahoma. Whether he needed to purchase the plane for $2 or $3 million that he purchased in this past year when he was vetoing education funds and funds for the Poison Control Center that has saved literally hundreds and thousands of children in the state of Oklahoma, and funds for early education programs and Head Start, Sooner Start and those kinds of things, I don't know. I mean, I disagree with that. Purchasing an airplane, we have other arrangements and other planes that can be leased for the governor. Whether he should have spent that kind of money when he was vetoing funds for important things like education, I disagree with.
He made the comment, I was listening on NPR this morning, and he said that it costs $175 a day to operate this airplane or trip or whatever, $175 an hour. And that's relatively minor amount of money. And I'm thinking $175 is not a minor amount of money to someone like me.
Well, especially not an hour. You know, and that tends to be a problem that some in government have. I mean, we deal with, in our budgeting process, we deal with millions and even billions of dollars. And so there is a tendency for some of those in government to look at a couple of $1,000s or a couple of tens of thousands or even $100,000 as relatively minor. I tend to think that's the wrong approach. I'm pretty fiscally responsible. And that means that we have to balance the budget. We need to make sure that we pay for the programs that are necessary. And even when it comes to, I mentioned earlier that I authored this tax cut, which Governor Keating called the largest tax cut in state history, the $5,500 income tax exemption for senior citizens. I was very careful about that because I wanted to make sure that we didn't blow a hole in our budget that we couldn't fund. I want to make sure that we can balance those budgets. So, yeah, $175 an hour to the governor may not be a lot, but to you and I, it is a lot. I agree.
John, do you have one more, I think?
Where do you stand on workers' compensation?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it's a very general question, and there's so much that can be said about that. I believe, from traveling my district, every business person that I have talked to has told me that the number one issue is workers' compensation. It's not right to work. It's not other important issues to these people, but the number one issue is workers' compensation. And I have to agree that I don't understand why a relatively small state like Oklahoma, which has the lowest labor cost in the nation, or close to the lowest tax burden, business tax burden in the nation, lowest utility cost in the nation, does not have the lowest workers' compensation rates in the nation. And that's the big concern. The rates continue to increase. They're relatively high compared to other states, certainly other states our size, and they shouldn't be. Yes, there is some fraud in the system, as there is in any kind of system. We in the past, and I guess where I stand is we need to continue to try to reform the workers' comp system. We've passed some good reforms in the last 3 years. They're starting to work. They're starting to bring those rates down. We have finally funded the workers' compensation fraud unit in the AG's office, although the governor vetoed several $1 million, I believe, of funding for the AG's office, which caused us a setback in that area this year. But we're getting there, and we're making some progress, and we need to continue that.
I want to thank you very much for being with us this morning. Good luck on November the 5th.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll be back talking again sometime in January.
Well, I hope to come back many times during the next 4 years.
Good. And we'll be back next week with another Capital Ideas.